Welcome to the Words That Change Lives podcast, helping leaders, coaches, and small business owners to 10 times the impact of their message. Join us as we delve into the art of powerful language, enabling you to speak with unwavering honesty, communicate authentically, and create a lasting impression with every word. How do you feel about conflict, as in conflict in communication? Do you find it an easy thing to do, or do you find it really, really hard? Well, as you probably know, and if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, particularly the first one, you'll know that that's something that I have struggled with my whole life. When I was younger, I used to avoid conflict massively, at huge cost to myself. I found it incredibly anxiety-inducing to be in conflict situations, and I still struggle with that. But over the years, I've done a lot of work, and particularly focusing on it in the corporate world has enabled me to personally also work on these things, use tools and strategies to be able to approach conflict and study and research on many, many ways that we can actually strengthen this muscle to be more productive in our disagreement, both in our relationships at home, with our children, with partners, with friends, families, peers, as well as within business, whether that be with colleagues, clients, and within the corporate world, in particular within cultures, within organizations, within leadership. It's how we can encourage and foster environments where it's actually okay to disagree. If you do it the right way, it should be encouraged, and therefore people feel okay to put their ideas forward, to maybe say if they don't think something is right, and here's a better way of doing it. And from what I know is that, our primitive systems kick in with this type of situation because we feel there may be threats in the environment. And that's where this comes from, really, and why we find it difficult. But there is a way through. And on my journey to working on this and strengthening this disagreement muscle within myself, I came across an author called Ian Leslie and his amazing book, How to Disagree. And in doing that, in reading that book and seeing his viewpoints and his different ways of looking at it, and reading this book, which is packed full of stories and case studies, I was able to see how I could build on this as a subject. And that's why I really wanted him to come on the podcast. And I'm so excited that he said yes. So who is Ian Leslie? Well, he is author of a few acclaimed books on human behaviour. Malcolm Gladwell, which is, that's amazing that Malcolm Gladwell said that he is one of his favourite writers. That's amazing. And his books include Curious, which is about the desire to learn, and the one that I'm talking about today, which is How to Disagree, which is on the art and science of productive disagreement and the topic of our conversation. He's got a background in business. So before launching his writing career, he worked as a strategist for some of the world's biggest brands and ad agencies in London and New York. He's written for the Financial Times, The Economist, and The New Statesman on work, politics, AI, and behavioural science. He is also a speaker. He speaks around the world on curiosity, productive conflict, and workplace culture. And he's got a weekly Substack newsletter called The Ruffian, and you'll see in the show notes how you can subscribe to that. It's got over 20,000 subscribers. So he's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, and he lives in London with his wife and 2 kids. And I love this conversation with Ian. I'd never spoken to him before, but what you can see is that he has a really interesting viewpoint with some simple strategies on how to encourage this type of discussion within the workplace, how we can lean into having these types of disagreements, why we find it so hard, and what we can do about it. And if you really liked this, please do comment and let me know. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is this realistic? Is this something we can change? What is it like for you within your relationships and your work life situation? What about the culture within your organisation? Does it encourage this type of stuff? And if not, what can you do about it? So I hope you enjoy this conversation, and let me know what you think. I'm going to start with a quote. At every opposition, We do not consider whether it be just but, right or wrong, how to disengage ourselves. Instead of extending our arms, we thrust out our claws. That is the first quote in the book, How to Disagree, by the amazing Ian Leslie, who I am very, very excited and grateful to be having a conversation with today. Ian, what's your take on that quote?
Hi, Helen. So thank you for having me on, first of all. I used that quote as the first epigraph in the book because it's by Michel de Montaigne, the 16th century French philosopher, essayist. And I think it's very smart because he's not saying, and some people might summarize what he says this way: when we're under threat, we feel attacked, right? He's not quite saying that. Let me just read it again. At every opposition, we do not consider whether it be just, but how to disengage ourselves. Instead of extending our arms, we thrust out our claws. So he's saying when we get into an argument, when somebody contradicts us, yes, we do feel threatened, but and we can become aggressive. We can thrust out our claws, but we're not just trying to destroy or attack the other person. What we're really doing, and this is the subtlety of his insight, I think, is we're trying to disengage. We're trying to push that person and push the argument away because we feel deeply uncomfortable with it. So actually, it's essentially a defensive maneuver. Mm-hmm. And when I started thinking about the book, I thought I really want to kind of write a book about all the incredible toxic conflict that I see going on in the world, on social media and everywhere, really. And why don't I write a book about how we should all kind of, learn to get along and cooperate and be nice with each other and avoid all these terrible disagreements. But after thinking about it and after doing more research, I started to think about it almost the other way around, which is that partly because we see all of this toxic disagreement so publicly now, we've become more conflict averse than ever. And that actually the problem isn't that we're disagreeing too much. Disagreement is an incredibly powerful, productive tool. The problem is that we disengage too quickly, either by not raising any objections or contradictions to the word at all, or by becoming aggressive and the conflict turning toxic and so on. I think Montaigne captures both of those in that quote. And what he's saying is, we should engage more with people and arguments with whom we disagree, because that's how we learn. And so really the book is a one long argument for having more and better and more productive disagreements.
And something very close to my heart, which is why I love this book. And I'm so pleased that you were having this conversation, because for me, my life and work career has evolved around not having those things, being uncomfortable, disengaging, and really going through growth periods of really working on that for myself, but also helping other people to do that too. And I think it's always going to be a journey and not a destination, because I've been doing this for many, many years now and still seeing the same issues and still working on those same issues myself. But you've mentioned something there that I really want to touch on, which is, you said, we're in a world now, a digital world, where on social media we're having more and more conflict. People are being more and more aggressive on comments and having debates and having all sorts of conflict through their maps of the world and how they see the world. And yet, at the same time, we're finding it more difficult to have productive disagreement. Why is that?
Well, let's talk about social media briefly. I mean, the book is, as you know, it touches on social media, but it's not at the focus of the book, which is more our kind of face-to-face interactions. But the interesting thing about social media is that it's sometimes said that it's forcing us into filter bubbles where we only have to hear from people with whom we already agree. There's some truth in that, but it misses out the other very important part of social media, which is that we become constantly confronted by people and opinions with whom we strongly disagree in a way that we never did before. You know, I grew up in a filter bubble, right? My parents used to buy the same newspaper every day, and then we watched the BBC News in the evening. That's a filter bubble. Now, I just turn on my look at my phone, and I can see 100 stupid, offensive, horrible ideas and opinions before breakfast. And almost, this stuff kind of comes at you whether you choose to or not, no matter how tightly you adjust your filters. So I think we've become reminded that the world is an incredibly disagreeable place, and that's been very kind of uncomfortable for us. And rather than social media developing into a kind of Greek agora or marketplace of ideas where everybody kind of exchanges, wonderful Socratic kind of, dialogues, we actually just sort of become horrified by the sheer cacophony and chaos of it all. And I think that's affected our offline life as well. And it's not the only reason, but I think it's one reason that we've become even more nervous of disagreement and contradiction than we were before. And I think that's a problem.
Do you think that we've become even more nervous about disagreement and contradiction in real life because A, we're not doing it as much because of the digital sphere, or B, because we are more fearful because of online interactions and we're fearful of those jumping off the digital page and into real life?
Yeah, I think partly it's because we see how toxic things get online, and that increases what's already kind of a strong part of most people's makeup, which is an aversion to conflict, right? Some people don't have that at all, but quite a lot of people are nervous of it, and this just makes us more nervous. But there are other kind of forces making us more wary than ever of conflict. There's a great and for the large part welcome emphasis on diversity, on collaboration, on being nice to each other, essentially, being kind and caring at work, and so on. But there's a point at which that slips into a feeling that people are kind of, treading on eggshells. They don't want to offend. They're way more aware of all the many ways in which they might possibly offend people, and so they become quite conservative in their interactions with people, unless they're people that they know very well. Working from home a lot also exacerbates that. It's harder to kind
Yes.
of get a rich sense of what your colleagues are thinking and feeling when you're not in the room with them. So there's a kind of move to maybe a kind of more formality, and just a more kind of careful method of communicating. Now, as I say, some of that is for good reason, but actually we should be aware. I think it's creating problems too, and one of them is an increasing unwillingness to engage in vigorous, interesting, exciting, creative disagreement.
Yeah. Because that's where magic happens, right? I've seen that myself when I started leaning into this and looking at this more and having these more honest conversations, more leaning into conflict and productive disagreement and welcoming that and learning the tools to be able to do that in a measured way. I saw some fantastic results, and that's why one of the biggest messages is really that there's huge value in disagreement. There's a massive value, but I think for the people listening, a lot of which are leaders within organizations who are business owners, what I'd really like to start to dive into before we move into some other parts of the conversation is really understanding this sort of conflict areas and the different types of disagreement. And within the book, you talk about 4 different types of disagreement. I think for the listeners, it'd be good to sort of contextualize that a little bit. Are you able to explain that, please?
Well, yeah, I don't see it quite as systematically as that, but I do think that people often make the mistake of thinking that the best way to have a disagreement is to take all the emotion out of it and simply have a kind of an abstract philosophical debate. And actually, it's much better when people bring their whole selves to a disagreement, to a conversation. And if they get passionate about something, and even if they get a little hot under the collar as they're discussing it, that's okay. The moment it slips into hostility, that's a problem, right? And that needs to be managed and dealt with. But I do believe that people need to kind of bring their feelings to the table as well. For one thing, feelings and emotions actually enhance our cognitive capabilities, right? As I say, as long as they're constrained and managed in some sense, actually make us sharper, intellectually sharper. And for another thing, a big part of the point of disagreement is to show your true colors, to be honest with each other. And that's why, in the end, it ends up kind of strengthening relationships between people. And so I think to kind of suppress that how you're feeling about the position that you're taking, or to encourage that in your team is a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that quite directly addresses your question, but
well, let's talk about that a little bit more in terms of culture within organisations. So we've got individual personality based on ancestry and society and what is expected of you and all of those sorts of things. And then we have organizational culture, where there are a set of beliefs and behaviors that are ingrained. Even though we sometimes want to shift and change organizational culture and behavior, it's hard to do, where that there's this underlying feeling of not being able to speak up if you disagree with something. And you've got another quote by Ian McEwan from the book Amsterdam, which is, everyone nodded, nobody agreed. And I think I see that so much happen within certain cultures, within certain organizations. And I want to talk about cross-culture in a minute too, because I know that you touch on that in the book. But why do we feel so uncomfortable with disagreeing in an organizational environment? And when we know that actually there's huge benefits from having these types of conversations, from diving into the nitty gritty, why do we feel so uncomfortable with it?
Well, it's a good question, and we can go as deep as we like here, because in a way it goes right back to our evolutionary history. It's only relatively very recently that we've learnt to value disagreement and intellectual debate and conflict as something that can lead to better thinking, better decision making. For most of human history, we've lived in groups of people with whom we broadly agree on the fundamentals of life, right? People who have very much the kind of same cultural, ideological background as we do. And if you go all the way back, if somebody was disagreeing with you in inverted commas, that usually meant they were about to try and take your head off, right? It wasn't like, oh, let's have an interesting debate about who's going to have this food. It was like, it's you or me. And and actually, when they put people in an fMRI scanner and kind of showed them statements with which they disagreed, they found that the same areas of the brain light up when somebody feels that they're about to be attacked by a bear, right? So it's no coincidence that when you're in a disagreement or you're about to start one, you physically feel it, right? It's biologically kind of ingrained with you to tense up. You could feel it that your chest tightens, your heart rate increases slightly. And what you're worried about physiologically and psychologically at some level is that you're going to have a damaging conflict with whoever you're talking to. And either you're going to come off worse, or you're going to damage the relationship in some way, right? Now, I understand that, right? And in a way, that kind of physical response, as I say, it can be managed and channeled to make the debate even better, right? So you shouldn't worry about it. You shouldn't try and eliminate it altogether. But you can't let it dominate you either, right? Because at that point, a lot of people go, well, I'm feeling like this, therefore I'll just step out of the disagreement altogether. Either I'll be quiet or I'll just quickly go, yeah, you know what, you're right, and I'll back down, even though I don't really feel that, right? Whereas I think you should use that kind of biologically programmed response to take the debate further, right? Put it into the service of debate. That requires some sort of trust between you. But when it's done well, it actually leads to better discussion and strengthens the relationship. There's, the metaphor for all this is physical exercise. I think, I don't particularly enjoy the prospect of going to the gym, going for a run, whatever it is, but I do it because I know that I'm by putting stress on my body, I'm enabling it to grow, right? I mean, literally, in the case of lifting, you're kind of tearing those tiny muscles in your arms and your legs, and they grow back stronger. And it's the same with relationships. You need to put some stress on those relationships in order for them to grow and strengthen, in order for the links between people to be stronger.
Yeah.
And I think in any kind of relationship, whether it's you and your partner or you and your team members at work, if you're avoiding disagreement altogether, eventually those relationships atrophy, just like your muscles atrophy without exercise.
100%.
So expect the stress, welcome it in a way, and learn to channel it into better discussion.
I love that comparison, and it's so true. And again, thinking about the parallels between having these personal discussions and disagreements and organizational ones. I think within an organizational context, there's some added complexity with hierarchy. And going back to those evolutionary links there, you were talking about, it was all about survival of the group, right? And so harmony and equilibrium was the main goal in terms of getting on and participating and not providing conflict in situations, because that could threaten the balance of the group and the survival of the group. And when we look at how that then translates into an organizational structures, and there's many different types of matrix structures within organizations now, but there's still within older organizations, ones that have been established for many, many years, there's this hierarchical structure. And then for the people that I've coached at the top and also further down, the leaders further down the organization, there's a fear around speaking out or being disagreeable to more senior people for fear of being, that evolutionary fear of being ousted from the tribe. What are your thoughts on that in terms of an organizational structure, and not necessarily what we can do about that? We'll move on to solutions in a minute, but your understanding of that and your thoughts of that.
Well, I agree with you. I think it's a problem. There is always a strong premium at work on being agreeable, and as I say, it's increased in recent times. I would say that women feel that imperative more than men, actually, and one of the reasons for the gender pay gap is that men are a bit more willing to say, well, actually, I think I'm being paid enough. Women feel the responsibility to be nice and cooperative. Now, as I said, it's good to be nice and cooperative. I'm not against that. But I think there is this middle way that we are not very good at, that we need to get better at, which is disagreeing cooperatively.
Yes.
Right? Being able to say, no, that's wrong. But the reason I'm disagreeing with you is that we can all get to a better place.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's harder for even harder for junior people to do, upwards, than it is for people to do who are kind of equals within the organization, and certainly harder for them to do than for the leaders to do it. But I think it's something that has to be managed. I think there are ways for more junior people to do it, and in a way that will kind of smooth that the difficult part of getting into a disagreement. And more importantly, I think that leaders have to consciously think about how they can encourage more junior colleagues to speak up and disagree.
Exactly. And here we go back to culture, right? And the environment. And you mentioned a couple of things in our conversation there. You mentioned trust. And there's also this sort of feeling safe, this feeling of safety. And we talk about in the HR world and leadership development world, this essence of psychological safety, and creating a culture, an environment where we feel psychologically safe. And when we feel safe within an environment, then we feel more confident, more courageous, and more okay within ourselves to speak up and cooperatively disagree.
Well, I think the concept of psychological safety has been really kind of misused or misinterpreted or misunderstood. I don't think it's working very well at the moment. What it should mean, what it ought to mean, is that people feel safe to speak up and disagree. At the moment, it seems to mean a space in which nobody feels they can say anything because they want everyone to feel safe, including themselves. If everyone gets that feeling and everybody's kind of like trying to feel as safe as possible and trying to get others to feel as safe as possible, well, you end up with groupthink. You end up with nobody kind of really kind of saying what they feel, and that's a problem. So it has to be the other way around. You should be safe in order to allow productive disagreement, productive conflict within the organization.
Yeah, I agree. You're right. It's almost like the pendulum swinging too far the other way in understanding that the safety is providing that. It's providing the environment to feel safe to authentically express ourselves, to be the most assertive version of ourselves, and to be creative in the expression of our ideas and our suggestions and our different ways of doing things and solving problems and all of those things. It's not just disagreeing. It's saying, I don't think that might work, but here's a different idea. Here's something that I think can really work, right?
Yeah, indeed, and that's true. And then also, it's not necessarily about my view must prevail or your view must prevail. It's about how can we take these 2 points of view and create something new and better that's better than either of them.
Collaboration.
Okay, so it's about collaboration, and it's about fertilization of ideas. It's about bringing different opinions and ideas together, and out of that clash comes something even better than either of us could have come up with on our own.
So true. One of my favorite TED Talks is actually really focused around that, in terms of the collaboration, the chemistry and alchemy that come from the network, and ideas within the network, and where that came from in terms of the coffee networks and coffee shops and things like that, and how creating that environment, again, of a baseline of safety, for then to be coming at things with a specific mindset. So I do a lot of training within organizations around this sort of stuff. I do influencing courses, I do conflict resolution courses, and the collaborative win-win outcome is, of course, like the main aim, the main goal. But in conflict situations, that can't always be the best outcome. We can't all win equally in all situations, because of the complexity of needs and the pressure of deadlines and goals and tensions and demands and all those sorts of things. And I use the Thomas Kilmann instrument, which is the conflict resolution instrument. Collaboration is one, accommodating is another, competing is another, avoiding is another, and compromising is another conflict resolution. And what Thomas Kilmann says is that these could be suitable in lots of different situations. However, in most situations, we need to understand what our natural way we bring ourselves to a disagreement is and how we can best deal with that. Because, as you mentioned earlier, some people might be more competing, which is, I'm okay, you're not, in a disagreement, because they feel the need to prove themselves and to defend themselves. And they do that maybe by attacking. And other people in a disagreement situation might be more accommodating. I'm not okay, you are, so I'll defer and I'll please to make things okay. I think it's in understanding where we come from, maybe in what's our default, that can then help us identify how we can better approach a disagreement situation. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I think you've noted the two poles of kind of bad approaches to disagreement. One is that you can be too competitive and focus only on you coming out as the winner here. And the other is that you can be too, in inverted commas, collaborative, and just say, well, I'm just here to go along with whatever that person says. I'm just trying to make peace here. And you've got to be, you can't be at either of those ends. You've got to be both competitive and collaborative, right? It's fine to have an element of competition in a debate, people bringing their best kind of ideas, their best thoughts to the table. That's great, but if the individuals become too focused on themselves, then that's also a problem. And I think that, again, going back to the psychological safe space and some of the things that are kind of fashionable in management at the moment, we talk a lot about diversity. And again, we that's for good reasons. And there are kind of social and political reasons to be keen on diversity, right? But from a kind of a managerial point of view, diversity isn't very useful unless it's accompanied by viewpoint diversity, by opinion diversity, right? You can have a very diverse group of people sitting around the table, and will have different backgrounds, different experiences, different beliefs, and they've got different information in their heads as well. If they all sit around and agree with each other, you're not unlocking the benefits of that diversity. Mm-hmm. Right? It doesn't actually help, which is it's like leaving money on the table. If you have this marvelously diverse group of people, well, let's use that diversity to bring out what everybody has inside them, because it's different from what everybody else around the table has. There's a thing psychologists call shared information bias, which is people have a tendency in groups, especially when they don't know each other very well, at work, to only talk about the things on which the information on which they already know, right? The information that's kind of out there.
Yes.
And we'll just talk about that. But in each of those people, there is information or insight that the others don't have access to, and that can remain locked away. Mm. And that needs to be brought out if you really want a kind of diverse, lots of variation in the options that we can take. And disagreement is this incredibly kind of powerful engine for generating that diversity, because it kind of pulls that information and that insight out of everybody, because everybody's like, no, hang on a minute, I'm going to make a stronger argument here, so I'm going to tell you something that you guys don't know. Mm-hmm. So I just think that managers need to pay more attention to that kind of diversity, and getting diversity of insight and information and experiences out on the table, right? And as I say, I think that's better for everyone.
I think it's such a good point, and I'm being reminded of a story. And by the way, I do a lot of stuff around storytelling in my work, and the stories in your book are phenomenal. You use storytelling throughout to make your points. And there's one particular story about a 51-day, well, it wasn't a hostage situation, but it was a 51-day negotiation between the FBI and I don't know what to call them, an organization, a cult in America, where, and it's in a chapter called Check Your Weirdness, which I really like, where the
Waco cult.
The Waco cult, where you're seeing transcripts of the conversation in this negotiation, and the point being that each person in this conversation has got a completely different map of the world, and is
Mm.
coming at things from a completely different viewpoint. And it lasted 51 days because there was a real kind of lack of putting yourself in the other person's shoes, showing empathy, and also understanding that there is difference. Let's now bring this into an organizational context, that there is diversity of thought based on experience, background, upbringing, wisdom, whatever it might be. And that can mean that you do have a completely different viewpoint to someone else. And rather that being a sticking point or a jarring point, it's actually something that can be embraced, can be really given space for and to.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be actively nurtured. I just came across recently a good example of this. I hesitate to draw us into politics, but during the pandemic, when Boris Johnson was prime minister, and his cabinet and his advisors were sitting around the table during lockdown, and they were making decisions on which parts of society should be able to open up first. And he had a largely male team, and it was quickly agreed that sporting events, including football matches, should be opened up as in some limited way, because that seemed important to people's happiness and welfare and so on. And Priti Patel, who is a female was a cabinet minister, spoke up and said, "What about nail clinics? Women getting pedicures, pretty important." She was completely laughed out of the room, right? It was seen as kind of trivial and shallow. What on earth are you talking about now? It's right. That's an example of having diversity around the table, but not making the most of that diversity, right? She was completely right. It's because they were just not aware of how many people go to nail clinics, how important it is for many people who are not men. And so you've got these people around the table. They all have different backgrounds. They're tapped into different kind of channels of thinking, but maybe into different communities and so on. You need to kind of listen and nurture and bring that out of everyone so that you have a greater variety of experiences and ideas on the table. Then you're going to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a really, really good example of that. And when I'm thinking about how I teach this and train this in organizations, and there's an influencing strategy called a pull influencing strategy, so that when you're building a relationship, or maybe there's low trust, or there's low knowledge, or it's a new relationship, or maybe it's a relationship where there is conflict currently, or the strength of the relationship is low, is that you use a pull technique in holding space, inquiring, asking questions, exploring the other person's position as much as possible to learn, to absorb that person's viewpoint before then using any other strategy of communication. So you're effectively holding space to glean information in order to make your next move.
Absolutely. In a way, even pull, it can feel a little bit like you're sort of dragging the person. um, like
I understand. Yeah, yeah.
there's it's more about kind of not pushing, right, which is partly what you're saying, right? Because when you push on people, they start to feel defensive, right? If they're feeling remotely insecure to begin with, which hopefully they wouldn't be, but they may well be, right? And once a disagreement turns into that, once people extend their claws and disengage and push away, then the disagreement is done. It's not going to be productive. So rather than pushing or pulling, I see it as, can you try and remove the barriers to the disagreement? Can you take things out of the way of you and this person disagreeing honestly and well? And often one of those barriers is that person is feeling insecure. They feel that maybe you're going to humiliate them in some way. they feel that maybe they're going to get in trouble, professionally in some way if they disagree, all sorts of reasons. And it's your job as the kind of interlocutor, and particularly if you're the boss, to remove those barriers one by one, make that person feel respected, say, look, I understand you've been working really hard on this, and I'm very appreciative of how hard you've worked on it. We think you're fantastic at your job. But here's what I want to raise. So you just remove those kind of barriers so that you can get to the thing that you want to talk about. That's what I talk about a lot. In a book is the way that hostage negotiators or interrogators or therapists, anybody who has tough conversations knows how to sequence the communication so that you don't get straight to the tough bit of the argument. You start, first of all, by just trying to strengthen the link, the relationship between you and the person in the room, or the people in the room. And you put them at ease. Essentially, you're trying to lower their defensiveness, lower their barriers, so that they can start speaking honestly, and you can too.
And it goes back to safety. It goes back to creating that environment of safety. Yeah. So before we come to a close, and before I ask you the final question, when we think about approaches and strategies, or what needs to be in place to create this feeling within organizations of safety so that people can speak up, what else do we need to be mindful of when we're thinking organizationally, culturally, where we can nurture an environment from leadership and encouraging that within our employees of productive disagreement, of feeling okay to disagree? What can we do?
I think there's a lot you can do, but let's just talk about one or two. One of them is a pretty simple one, which is being explicit about the fact that you welcome and expect productive disagreement in your organization. Don't underestimate the effect you can have by just saying that.
So true.
Right? Another one is modeling productive disagreement with your equals. If you're senior in the organization, right, show more junior people. I've talked to founders, startups who are, very intent on kind of forming the culture of their organizations. And one of them said to me that myself and my co-founder will publicly disagree in front of everyone. Again, not in a kind of hostile or an unpleasant way, but actually the opposite, right? In a kind of joyful and funny and, but honest way, because we want them to see that that's fine, right? That's encouraged. And that's how we work together, the two of us. That's how we want you to work as well. So you can say it explicitly, and you can say it implicitly by modeling it like that. And then another thing I'd say is, going back to our earlier conversation about the hierarchical problem, is being really kind of sure to congratulate junior people for speaking up and disagreeing. This is something that Reed Hastings at Netflix talks about a lot and did a lot at Netflix, which was encouraging junior people to speak up, hearing them out, engaging with what they had to say, even if he didn't think it was, up to much. And then, when people were standing up and the meeting was over, going around to that person, putting his arm around them, saying, yeah, thank you for that contribution. Making sure that everybody could see that, right? So that everybody kind of saw, oh, okay, this is a guy who's not just unafraid of hearing what junior people have to say, but actually wants it and expects it. And then helping that filters down to everyone else in the organization. Yeah.
So simple, right?
Yeah. Very simple.
If we think of it like that, that's actually pretty simple. And again, it's a top-down approach within hierarchical organizations to be modeling that and communicating that and showing that, showcasing that, to be able to create that safety. In other organizations, I guess it's creating that language for everybody to be doing that and feeling okay. Brené Brown's done a lot of work on this within organizations around rumbles and encouraging things like rumbles and rumble conversations and those sorts of things. It's about creating that sort of language around it to make it feel okay. But I recommend anyone who is listening to this to read Ian's book, How to Disagree. It's a really, really insightful, thought-provoking it's not just a business book, because the amount of story in this is, it really makes you think, and it shifts your thoughts. And I really thank you for providing your insight today in this conversation, Ian. And with all my guests that I have on the Words That Change Lives podcast, I like to finish by asking one last question, which is, what words have changed your life?
Well, I'm hoping it doesn't have to be directly about disagreement.
No.
So this is one that I have had in the back of my mind for a few years now, and it's kind of come back to me recently because the person who said it recently died. So Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow,
Yes.
where he speaks about system 1, system 2 thinking and so on. Had this long and glorious career as a psychologist and a behavioral economist, Nobel Prize winning, etc., etc. Just died. I mean, he was in his 80s after a wonderful life. And he was a genuinely wise man, right? Not just because of all the incredible research he did, because of his life. You know, he grew up, lived through the Second World War as a Jew in Europe. So, you know, then lived through Israel's wars, did a lot in his life. Anyway, so he says, somebody asked him actually, what's the most important kind of lesson that you've drawn from all your work? And he thought for a while, and then he said, nothing in life is as important as it seems while you are thinking about it. Okay, so that's which is not just a kind of that is based on research, right? So it's based on lots of studies, but I sensed it was also something that he'd come to learn from his long kind of experience of life, which is everything when you're thinking about it is magnified in importance. Actually, is not as important as you think, and we find that very hard to kind of cope with. But actually, once you absorb it and you learn it, becomes like a kind of happy secret. And when something is going wrong, or when you're feeling stressed, or when you're feeling anxious, you know, maybe you've said something which is very stupid, or maybe something's happened at work or in the world out there that feels terribly kind of important and anxiety generating, and you're feeling about it. It's probably not as important as it seems right now as you're thinking about it. Try and remember that.
Yeah.
And I think it will lead you to be a calmer and happier person.
Oh, I love that, and that reminds me of a similar saying, which, you know, will this feel as big a year from now?
Exactly.
When you're in that eye of an anxiety storm, everything is exacerbated because of the sympathetic nervous system, because of the way that we're wired, and so a grounding technique is to, you know, lift yourself out of that eye of that storm to be able
out of the moment.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much, Ian. I really, that's going to make me think and ponder for the rest of today. So thank you for your time. And I'm going to be including in the show notes ways that you can get in touch with Ian, and that you can buy his book as well.
Thank you very much, Helen. Really nice to talk to you.
Thanks for listening to Words That Change Lives. Please rate, review and follow on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really means the world and helps me to reach more people so that we can all harness the power of our words and change lives for the better.